Multiracial whiteness reflects an understanding of whiteness as a political color and not simply a racial identity. Okay. I'm Shane Corey, and this is the third episode of Independent Citizen. We're into 2021, and you think things would calm down just a little bit. Surprisingly, nothing happened that was incredibly crazy over the weekend. I was a little surprised. I think the biggest news is Phil Spector died. He was the producer, came up with the Wall of Sound, 81 years old, died in a federal prison. But he was the one that was convicted of killing Lana Clarkson. If you recall, she was kind of a B actress, was a waitress at House of Blues. He took her home and minutes later came running out saying, I think I shot her. Anyway, the most notable thing about Phil Spector was his attempt to bring back wigs for men. He was quite the character. I don't even know what to call that. That was one heck of a wig. But yeah, so that was, I'd say, interesting. But, a few other things did happen that were more concerning than Phil Spector dying, for sure. One is the buildup of troops in the nation's capital. Not just the buildup of troops, but kind of the crackdown on domestic terrorism as a result of the January 6th protests. So we now have 25,000 National Guard troops in D.C. They're being vetted by the FBI to make sure they're not extremists. I don't know if they're going through their social media accounts or just questioning them, but it's unprecedented. You have to consider we have 5,000 troops deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan combined right now. The biggest show of force with troops in the DC area or in DC was after the assassination of Martin Luther King, and there was 13,000 troops deployed there. We have nearly doubled that on top of thousands of law enforcement officers from Maryland, DC, Virginia. Virginia State Police are there. It's bizarre. This is Banana Republic stuff, where we are going into the inauguration of a United States president, but having to lock down the Capitol to basically prevent anybody from coming in. I would say it's a gross overreaction to what happened on the 6th, but maybe there's something we don't know. I guess we'll find out soon enough. But that's, there's videos all over. And this is not uncommon for troops to be marching in the streets. Well, it's very uncommon for troops to be marching in the streets. The security checkpoints are being set up, have been set up in place really throughout last week, to the point where I was reading a story about a Virginia security guard who was stopped at one of the checkpoints, forgot he had a firearm on him, was asked, do you have a firearm? He said, yes. They yank him out, arrest him. And he explained, hey, I didn't realize I turned here coming into DC, having the firearm. I didn't have enough time to turn around. I'd be late for work if I went home and dropped off the gun, which is anybody that lives in Virginia that goes to gun ranges. It's a common mistake to cross that border where having a firearm, possession of a firearm is legal in Virginia, but as soon as you cross that imaginary border, you're committing a felony. So I've been in situations where I was going to a meeting in DC, had a firearm in the Jeep, gone to the gun range or whatever, had to either stop, get out, take the metro in Virginia, or turn around. And it's an annoyance, but it's a mistake you don't want to make, because the repercussions of getting caught with a firearm in DC are severe, as this gentleman is probably going to find out. He was released by the judge, explained he's not a terrorist, he's not an extremist, he was just a security guard going to work. So you're going to see probably a little bit more of that. But again, having these security checkpoints where you're not even free to walk around our nation's capital is a little bit crazy right now. So I want to talk about a few things. Before I do, I want to, I mentioned in our second episode, and I encourage everybody to comment, weigh in, share stories, subscribe. But if you comment, I want to address your comments. We have a gentleman that had a pretty lengthy comment that I don't disagree with, Warren Jappe, Jappe. I'll just read a segment of this. Yes, political parties are a problem. And in the second episode, I was addressing the Washington's farewell address, the baneful effects of the spirit of the party, and how that was very relevant to what we see today. So he's weighing in response to that. Yes, political parties are a problem. They try to separate us into conflicting groups using race, ideology, and use idols to look up to for salvation. They aren't the biggest problem in American politics. It's the abuse of government in both parties. I agree with that. I think that those are really the same issue. The abuse of government, or the abuse of power that occurs in government, is a result of unchecked authority, which comes with political parties. If you take a look at how the Republican and Democrat parties stay in power, it's because it's pretty much impossible for a third party or independent candidate to get elected. There's ballot access laws, which ballot access laws are the laws that exist state by state that require a certain threshold or different rules depending on the state in order just to get your name printed on the ballot. So in some states, say the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, have ballot access based upon previous performance. Say they got 5% in an election, and therefore they're granted ballot access in the next cycle. Some states make it nearly impossible. Oklahoma, for instance, the threshold is ridiculous to get a national candidate on the ballot. So you have petitioning requirements where you have to go and collect tens of thousands of signatures. In Oklahoma, it's within a short time frame you have to do it. And if you can't do it, you think, it's okay, we can write in a candidate. In the state of Oklahoma, you either vote Republican, Democrat, or you go home. There's not even a write-in option in Oklahoma. So state by state, it varies, and who writes those rules? It's Republicans and Democrats. They come together, decide on the rules, and lock out third parties. So that's what leads to the abuse of power that we see in government, in that you have basically parties that operate without competition. And a big excuse Republicans and Democrats use to keep competition off the ballot is it would confuse the voters. Too many choices would lead to anarchy in the voting process. Look, you can walk down the cereal aisle and choose between 50, 100 different brands of cereal, and it's not causing any problems. It's competition. But when you go to ballot, to say that it's causes confusion for voters to have to choose between a number of candidates is ridiculous. That's just calling us all idiots. So that's their excuse to control, maintain their own power and control things. So again, I'd say that's one and the same. Warren closes by saying, "This is not a government of the people. We're just resources at their disposal. We don't run it, but we fund it at gunpoint and get lied to." Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And when he says we fund it at gunpoint, it's not being facetious. If you don't pay your taxes, if you don't do what the government says, there's a good chance you're going to end up with somebody, with a gun holstered or in your face or whatever, requiring you to do so. So it's, of course, an extreme circumstance, but that's reality. Government requires us to fund their activities, writes all the rules, and we really are powerless to do anything about it, especially when you have control by two parties. Again, it's either Republican, Democrat, or, well, sorry, got to go home. It's that lesser of two evils. So how that will change, I don't know. I have ideas, having run the Libertarian Party in the past, but that was a depressing 4 years of my life, in that no matter how hard you fight, you're really not going to make any progress because of the control of the ballot, control of the media. If you're a third party candidate, you're considered fringe. You're kind of written off as a crazy because you're not part of the two major parties. I'd say today, you're more of an extremist if you are a Democrat or Republican. On the extreme side of the Democrat Party, the AOCs pushing outlandish legislation that's taken as mainstream now, that's fringe. On the right, you have, members of Congress that most recently pushed all the falsehoods with the vote. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene, which I don't dislike her, but she is a QAnon supporter, and fell in line with that, which is just a crazy conspiracy theory that I don't even want to get into. It's just insane. But that is fringe. That's craziness that typically would be relegated to third parties in the past. Now I wouldn't say that's mainstream, but the extremism of the right and the Republican Party, and its drive toward populism because of President Trump, is extreme. So, Warren, I appreciate your comment. Don't disagree. And if anybody else would like to weigh in on anything I have to say, feel free, and we'll bring it up. On to another topic, and I just don't want to really jump around too much, but there's a lot to fit in. Washington Post came out with an article over the weekend that has me just scratching my head. The title of it is, "To Understand Trump's Support, We Must Think in Terms of Multiracial Whiteness." What is multiracial whiteness? Well, they bring up Enrique Tarrio, who's the chairman of the Proud Boys, who is half Black, half Cuban, and the leader of the supposed white supremacist group. They bring up Ali Alexander, who was head of Stop the Steal, who is Arab, and really focus on the Latino community's support of President Trump, and lambast it as some type of shift in race. And it's one of the most hypocritical articles I've read in quite some time, coming from leftist center media. And I just want to read a few quotes. "Multiracial whiteness reflects an understanding of whiteness as a political color and not simply a racial identity." Okay. I don't even understand this. Maybe I don't have that liberal mindset, so it's just not clicking. I'll go on. "Multiracial whiteness promises Latino Trump supporters freedom from the politics of diversity and recognition. For voters who see the very act of acknowledging one's racial identity as itself racist, the politics of multiracial whiteness reinforces their desired approach to colorblind individualism." I thought that's what we wanted, was a colorblind society where we don't discriminate against each other based upon the color of their skin, who they love, you name it. I thought that's what we were going for. And now this article criticizes Latino voters as basically, I see it as they're saying they're race traitors because they support Trump, which that's the language that white supremacists use. Multiracial whiteness offers citizens of every background the freedom to call Muslims terrorists, demand that undocumented immigrants be rounded up and deported, deride BLM as a movement of thugs and criminals, and accuse Democrats of being blood-drinking pedophiles. So that's really what we're getting into now, is this article has nothing to do with race. They're trying to find a way to label the Enrique Tarrios, the Ali Alexanders, as white supremacists, despite the color of their skin going across against that narrative. For the longest time, the media avoided talking about Enrique, ever showing his picture. Now he's much more prominent, and you're thinking, that dude's not white. Wait, he's the head of the Proud Boys? I thought they were a bunch of white supremacist thug skinheads. Well, that narrative didn't work with the press. So now it's, well, you can still be a white racist, but be a different color. Now I'll just close in this. In the post-Trump era, the challenge will be to prevail over the extremism of Trump's white majority while trying to prevent the politics of whiteness from becoming an increasing multiracial affair. So basically it's, let's keep the Republican Party or the Trump MAGA movement, the red hats, from branching out and drawing any other people of color, even if they are opposed to illegal immigration. They're not in favor of the BLM movement and see that differently from what it is, or they're against Islamic terrorism. So you can't, they want to turn this away from the issues and back to race. But really, when it comes down to it, the folks, the Black voters, the Latino voters that are part of the populist movement, they're not there because of identifying with white people. They're there because they're passionate about single issues. And this is a way to just divide us further by taking it back to race. And this is kind of the Democrats' MO going back decades and decades, is you have to divide us along racial lines. You have to keep us separated and hating each other. You know, they want to go back to the world where if you're Black, you hate white people. If you're white, you hate Black people. Latinos hate Black people, vice versa. They want the divide back. They don't want a colorblind society because that is much more difficult to control. You're seeing that right now in a group of folks they're calling domestic terrorists with the Boogaloo Boys. The Boogaloo Boys is an enigma, not necessarily a militia. They're not white supremacists because they go out and march with BLM. So the media is trying like hell to define who they are, and by defining, you're minimizing. One saying I heard a long time ago that really stuck was, the rule of the jungle is eat or be eaten. The rule of politics is define or be defined. So if you're not defining your opposition, you're losing. You have that advantage out the gate if you can define somebody in a negative term. And in many cases, when it comes to the left defining the right, their go-to description, the go-to definition that they want the public to remember whenever they hear this class of people is white supremacist, racist, Nazi. That's the untouchable definition that they want to apply to their opposition. And this is kind of, this article is very telling, because they really want to take this back and expand the definition of white supremacy to include people of color, which is mind-boggling to me, but that's where we're headed. Whenever you have groups of people coming together, and whether you like Trump or don't like Trump, you do have to admit that he brought together people of color. Despite being called a racist and drawing in white supremacist, he still had a lot of support among the Black community, the Hispanic community, you name it. So this is kind of their way to undermine that. And we're going to see probably a lot more ridiculous commentary in this direction going forward. So just want to cover that. If you guys, have more thoughts on that, on multiracial whiteness, please do comment. I don't understand it, aside from it's just an attempt to expand the definition of white supremacy. But if I'm wrong, weigh in and let's have a discussion about that. So we're going to keep it quick today, and we'll be back later this week with some more unfolding events. There's a lot happening this week with Joe Biden's inauguration. See what happened was with this troop buildup. And I'm sure there's a lot more that will happen in the meantime. But thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you soon.